quick introduction. So I'm Daniel Herrera, CEO of Evolv I.T. I've been in IT for 20 plus years. So we're running an MSP. In case you don't know what MSP is, so MSP is a company that remotely manages the infrastructure or IT for other businesses. So basically we partner with companies and become their IT department. All right, so we're gonna be talking about remote work. So we're gonna run over security. We're gonna talk about productivity tools, talk about your infrastructure, managing remote employees, remote employee onboarding protocols, and we have an exclusive awesome offer for you guys at the end of this. All right, so the impact of remote work. So like it or not, remote work is here to stay. So 63% of people have listed that remote work is the most important part of a job role, even over salary, which is around 61%. Companies can save money by remote employees. So you get to cut down on office space, you cut down on lunches. There's just a lot of different items that you get to cut down on remote employees. The other side of that is your employees can also be more productive working from home. So you've got, commute time. So those that live in cities that have a lot of traffic, you get to cut down on that. So they can start their day quicker, they can get going faster. They don't have to deal with sitting in traffic, the frustrations, wrecks, rain, all the other things around that. The other is the flexibility and freedom. So when they're working from home, if they're not feeling good that day, they still might work. You don't have to take a day off just because you're feeling bad and you're worried about spreading a cold around the office. You can work from home, you can still get things done. If they need to take a break for a few minutes just because they're wearing themselves out, they can go sit on the couch, come back to work. So it does offer more flexibility and freedom for their employees that are going to work remotely as well. The other is location. So now you're not geographically hindered by hiring employees. So if you're hiring in Birmingham or say Atlanta or wherever your business is, you really, with an office, you can only hire in those areas. So by allowing remote employees, you now can expand that pool to anywhere in the US or even globally, depending on how your company's set up and how you want to hire. The other is improved productivity. Overall, employees that can work from home successfully, they do a great job at it. They're able to focus more. They take less breaks. And so, you see a sense of productivity improvement with those employees. The other side of the business side, and we touched on this a little bit, but you've got reduced costs on employees. You've got a larger talent pool, reduced payroll expenses. You also get less absenteeism. You get back on the sickness side. So if they're sick or if they need a doctor visit, they're able to quickly go do those and they actually get right back to work. The other is you reduce employee turnover. So we all know that, happy employees are going to stay with the company and they're not going to leave. So again, it's here to stay. So we need to go ahead and learn how to embrace it and how to make sure we're also setting up our employees that work remotely for success. All right, so one of the big things with remote employees is security. We touch on this a lot, we talk about it a lot. So, whether they are remote, whether in the office, security is huge, but when you add that element of remote, you've got additional security that comes in place. So with that, we've got employees that are now having devices moving around. They're now, accessing the data differently. They're pulling the data down off your systems potentially onto their systems. So we got to really make sure security is top of our mind and that we're implementing everything that we need to. So through recent research, it's found that 60% of businesses actually close 6 months after a cyber attack. So let's not be, a statistic. So make sure we're paying really good attention to security, make sure we're putting proper protocols in place, make sure your IT company is working with you and they actually understand how to handle remote employees, they understand your workflows, they understand how you're utilizing different clouds and different systems. Again, make sure it's top of mind as you're extending and bringing on remote employees. And we'll touch a little more on this, Ben, but employees are one of the #1 cause of data breaches. So 88% of breaches are caused by employee error. And we're gonna talk about some things of how we can reduce that and limit your risk. All right, so talking about security, one of the big things that we need to see implemented is device policies. So make sure you've got a clear, precise policy. Make sure all your employees understand that policy. So we want to make sure, one, we're limiting what is installed on those devices. We're limiting who is using those devices. We see a lot of times that when there's a computer at home and people have, especially teenage kids, they tend to just want to jump on it and start using that. So they're putting games on it, they're going to social media sites, visiting websites they should not be visiting. Well, that all falls back on the company as a risk or on the employee as a risk. So make sure you've got really good policies that specify the limitations and how that device should be used. The other side is security awareness and education. So make sure you're training your employees, make sure you've got a great platform in place so you can actually monitor which your employees are a risk for your company. Do that through the phishing simulation, so sending those out at least monthly, if not more often. Make sure it has a follow-up training for anyone that follows or fails that email simulation. And then do an overall security awareness training. So make sure people understand how to spot emails, how they, spoofing emails, how to look for phishing, don't click on links, just all the good hygiene that they need to understand around security. Make sure you've got a proper security awareness and education platform in place. The other thing that we see a lot with remote employees is they're working from coffee shops. They're out and about. They don't always just want to be stuck at their house or in a home office. And so we see them travel and we see them connecting to random networks. For the most part, it's generally okay, but there's always those cases they're connecting to a bad network where somebody who's simulating, say Starbucks, and it's what we call in IT as a man-in-the-middle attack. So you've got somebody out there who has opened up a Wi-Fi network. They're pretending to be a good public Wi-Fi, but it's not. It's a bad actor. They're trying to capture your data. They're trying to man in the middle and capture information. So one of the ways to combat that is what we call as an always-on VPN. So that means no matter where you're at, no matter what you're doing, your data from endpoint to endpoint is encrypted. So even if you were to connect to a bad network, and there is a man in the middle trying to read your data, they can't get the data, it's encrypted. So talk to your IT department, talk to your IT company, make sure they've got an always VPN for any employees that are traveling or those that are fully remote and moving about on that side. The other side is protocols. Make sure you've established clear protocols on how to set up those workstations or laptops for remote employees. One of the big things we want to see is device encryption. So you've got people now with devices, they may be moving, they may leave it at Starbucks, they go to McDonald's, wherever they're using that device. If it was to get stolen from there, if it gets stolen out of their car, say they travel to the airport, that device is taken. We want to make sure nobody can get the data off of that device. So make sure you've got a good protocol in place so that all devices that are mobile or move around have encryption enabled. The other is make sure you explain to your employees, do not walk away from their device in unattended areas. So, you may have it set up just for a second, think I'm gonna walk over here and just grab a coffee or I'm gonna go pick up my food. You turn around and the device is gone. Or somebody's on your device, there's a kid running around. So make sure they understand, do not ever leave their device unattended in public. And another side that we see quite a lot, and nobody really thinks about it, is you're sitting there working, you're not paying attention who's looking over your shoulder. So make sure your employees, when they're working outside of their homes and they're working at a remote place in public, that they're guarding their screen. So don't have anyone reading your emails, looking at your clients. So you want to make sure they're just paying attention to their surroundings on that side. All right, so the other side, and this is a big side that we see, is productivity tools. So you're used to your employees who are working in the office. We know what tools they need, we know what systems they use, we know how that works, and that's fine. But when you're bringing somebody in for remote, especially if this is your first time bringing remote employees, or say you're expanding, you're adding more, one is culture. How do you make sure they feel like they're a part of the team? You don't want a new employee joining that's remote and you're trying to fumble around, figure out what applications, figure out how they're gonna work. How do we get them logged into systems? So make sure your IT company's thinking about, your line of business tools, how remote employees will utilize them, what does the workflow look like, what apps are they gonna need, are there different types of setup? Are we gonna use Teams for internal communication? Are we using another protocol? How are we handling, that culture? The other is even their at-home setup. Do they need webcams? Do they need a microphone, headset? So fully think through what they're going to need to be able to do their day-to-day functionality, and have that ready for them, and have it pre-designed so that you don't have an employee starting and constantly needing to ask for items. Again, we want to make that experience great when a new employee starts. So just make sure you think through that, and your IT company builds that out with you. The other thing we run into a lot now is connectivity. So we all know how Spectrum or whoever the other carriers are we have at home. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not. So you want to make sure your client has great connectivity. Make sure the upload and download speeds are good, especially if they're more rural areas. So you can use like speedtest.net. You can run a check on that. You can actually test the speed up and down. You can test the jitter. So you want to make sure that they can, if they're going to be answering calls for you or placing phone calls, make sure their internet can actually handle that, and you don't have, dropped calls. You don't have calls that are buffering or losing audio. So make sure they have good internet at home. And one of the things you can do is also, if you have company phones, enable tethering. So in the event their internet goes out, they don't have to leave, or they don't have to worry about issues. They just tether to their phone. And generally, for most applications, that'll suffice and allow the employee to work until their home internet comes back on. All right, business needs. So this really requires some sit down, some discussion with your IT team. So one of the things you need to look at, depending on how you function, if you still have servers or applications that require servers, is that server on-prem or is it off-premise? And is that done through a co-location or cloud hosting provider? So you really got to look and think about how your applications function. What are the workflows around those? How do we need to save data? How do we need to retrieve data? What is the role of that position? So if you've got somebody who's coming in and they're a heavy user, say they're in your marketing department, and they're dealing with large files, video files, well, you can't really have those pulling consistently across the cloud. So you've got to make sure you're looking at the long-term picture of each of those roles and how they're going to utilize the data and how they're going to function. Of course, we all know the cloud and how it increases productivity when you're working remotely. And so sit with your IT team and discuss, how you can utilize the cloud if you're already not. And maybe you need to go fully cloud. Maybe there's a hybrid solution. But again, you need to think about those employees that are there in the office and those that are remote, and how are they going to use the systems different? How do you keep your data safe? You don't want a bunch of data just being pulled down to local machines and then something happened to that machine. So you got to think about the overall big picture of how you want your data, how it's going to be utilized, and what the workflows are around that. And then back on the equipment side a little more is, phones are here to stay as well. We wish we could, just always message people, chat people, but we've got to be making phone calls, have to be answering phone calls. So you need to think about what type of phone your users are going to use. So when they're remote, are they going to use a soft phone, which is an application that goes on their laptop, goes on their cell phone? Are they going to actually have a physical desk phone? And does your phone system support either one of these types? The other side we're seeing, more often with remote employees is they're now starting to use a cell phone. Pros and cons to that, especially if you've got a sales team or an operations team that are working heavily with your clients or prospects. If you're allowing them to use a company cell phone, if you allow them to use a personal cell phone and they leave the company, your clients and prospects now have their number, not the company's number. So there's some ways to utilize a soft phone so that you've always got a number that stays with the business and that you can move other employees, you can forward that number. So just kind of think ahead through that of how they're going to utilize your phone system for remote employees. The other is your backup. So as you have these data, the employees working remote, they do handle data differently. So they are going to save sometimes more on their machines when they're working. Make sure you've got proper workflows in place. The data is always being put to your server, always being put to your cloud solution. And you may even want to think about adding a backup system that backs up those workstations. We know that we can consistently tell people, use the system, use the system, use the system. They don't. They still put the data on their desktop. They put it in there by documents. So you may want to look at adding a backup in place for workstations. So in the event something happens, system crashes, they lose the system, you're not out data. All right, so one of the big topics, and some people like to talk about this, some don't. And again, this isn't a big brother scenario, and we sometimes hear it labeled as that, but it's really through your employee tracking for their productivity. And so basically we've got a platform that monitors all the systems, and it's looking at what your employee is doing, how often they're doing it, how often they have idle time on their systems, what applications are being utilized the most. And so it's, again, it's not really to be a big brother, it's to make sure everyone is working on the same page. We keep hearing stories more and more now that employees are working 2 jobs. And so, you want to make sure you're getting what you pay for. You want to make sure your employees are actually dedicated to your team, and you don't want to share them with somebody else. That leads into multiple other issues, different problems, different scenarios. So having some software that tracks what your team is doing, who is being productive, who is not being productive, who might need training, who may be engaged versus disengaged. So really the system gives you a great overview of where everyone stands comparative to everyone else in your company. So it's really good to be able to see when they start their day, when they're in their day, how much time they're spending on each task. So you can track if you've got 4 people are spending X amount of time on a particular task and one person is spending double the time on that task, then you get to understand, like, is it a training issue? Is it a personnel issue? So now you're making decisions more through data and not just off of hunches. So having a productivity management tool really increases the value proposition around your employees so that you can understand and know where you need to make changes. All right, so a really, really big topic here, and this goes back to your security, but is your remote employee termination protocols. So this kind of changes things because generally when you're doing a termination, you got to walk the employee out. You don't let them back to their system. Everyone knows your process around that. But when you're dealing with remote employees, things are different. So they've got their device at their home. They may have it wherever they're traveling. And so when it comes time to do a termination, you need to make sure you've worked with your IT. You've got a full checklist in place. You understand the workflows. So when you do a termination, you need to make sure you lock them out of their device. Don't allow them to get to their device remotely. You can then have them ship it back to you or however you need to handle that side. Make sure any type of cell phones, any type of communication devices they have, that is locked down and cut. You don't want them to be able to communicate with your clients, sending emails out of themselves. So make sure you've got that checklist in place and you're terming things efficiently and correctly. So make sure you've got proper protocols in place. Work with your IT for checklists, the workflows. So you want to make sure that when you have to unfortunately let somebody go, we want to make sure that we terminate their device access. Make sure they terminate access to email or any other communication systems with the client. Same goes for phone calls and outbound and inbound. You don't want somebody you've just terminated to be able to communicate with your clients or prospects. Especially if it was not a great termination and ended badly. So we want to make sure we've just got proper protocols in place and checklists that we can terminate efficiently. One of the things that we also see is any passwords that they have known across your system or your client systems, we want to make sure we're keeping a list of those and audit, and we go change those passwords. We don't need anyone that we've now terminated and potentially disgruntled logging into any of our systems, manipulating client data. So make sure we've got a really good checklist and you've got a workflow in place how to handle those remote employees. The other side is communicate that internally across your company. Especially to your IT team. We don't want somebody who's been potentially terminated and IT not be aware of it, and they're then calling in, they're needing extra stuff, they're asking for extra data, wanting copies of things, and your IT not aware of that. Now there should be some checks and balances in place to prevent some of that, but depending on the level of the employee, especially if they're an executive of your company and terminated, your IT team may just hand them what they ask immediately. So make sure that it's communicated clearly across your company. Everyone is aware of the termination. So that way, again, there's no mishaps of somebody giving data or providing access to something they shouldn't have access to. The other is, workload task allocation. Again, make sure you've got proper documentation around how to handle that, how to reassign that. If you've got them in systems such as your CRM or other applications, who's going to take on that workload? Do any active tasks they have, does that get assigned to somebody else? Just think through the whole thing with your IT team and make sure they've got a checklist, you've got a checklist, and after termination, you can kind of marry those together and it's a completed process. All right, so exclusive offer for everyone attending, and thank you guys for being here. So one of the things we have is free consultation. So again, we work with a lot of different companies, a lot of different clients in industries across from legal, financial, insurance, healthcare. And so one of the things that we do is we build out a full checklist and workflow of how to handle remote employees. And so this is from setting them up all the way down to terminations. So really, start to finish of how to make sure their first day of starting, they're able to work, they're able to access all the systems, all the way down to the unfortunate time when you have to let somebody go. We've got that checklist in place. We make sure we are handling all the audit requirements if you do have different compliance needs. So we work with us, we can get that set up for you. The other side, if you'd like to see the employee monitoring tool, you want to be able to know the productivity of your team and have a data analyst standpoint from that, let us know. We can show you a demo of that tool. The other side too right now is a free network inspection. Again, cybersecurity is on the rise. We're seeing a lot more attacks. We're seeing threats. You guys know we talked about some last month. Birmingham City was compromised and taken offline for quite a while. So get with our team. We do a third-party security assessment. We'll do penetration testing and a vulnerability test assessment for you guys as well. No obligation. We hand you a report. You are able to give that to your IT team. You'll know, where your issues lie, what you need to fix, areas to improve. If you don't have an internal IT team as well, talk with us. If you have outside, talk with us. We can give you next steps or give you advice as well. The other side we're doing for July is any new clients come on, we're waiving the setup fee. So if you're not a client of ours right now, or if you need to, bring IT in, if you need to change IT vendors, reach out to us. Again, take advantage of the July special, and it's really to help beat the heat. We all know it's hot out there right now. And that is it. So thank you guys for joining. See you next month.